I think if we went around the room and I said, ask you this one question, is there anyone in your life who has hurt you? I think we could probably be here forever, right? I think we could be here forever telling war stories of all the bad things that people have done. Maybe even within the church sometimes. We go, man, that was at that one place and this. And one of the things that, I don't know about you, maybe you're better than I am, but when someone does something wrong to me, there's just something inside my head that wants revenge, okay? Like, I want to get back at that person, okay? Maybe they steal $20. I say, Lord, take them for all they have, okay? Sometimes my prayer is a revengeful prayer, and then I have to ask the Lord for forgiveness on my revengeful prayers and say, Lord, instead of taking everything that they got, maybe you should just bless them, Lord, because they needed it more than I did. See, on Mother's Day, we think about family. Maybe a family member is angry with you or makes family get-togethers a battle zone. I don't know about you, but it was Christmas. Every time my Uncle Mark would come into the doors, we're like, oh boy, here it comes. Here it comes. Uncle Mark's going to do something that's going to make my dad mad. And now it's on. Now it's Merry Christmas, everyone, right? Maybe a friend has turned on you, has spread lies about you. Maybe someone has said something that hurt your feelings or made you feel less valued. Maybe it's an ex-spouse who's lashing out at you and making things difficult. Maybe it's someone at work who has targeted you. Or maybe it's another student that makes your life miserable at school. No matter how many times you get away from them, they're like a magnet and they come right to you. And you're just like, why all the time? See, chances are someone probably has come to your mind. It hurts. Maybe even it angers you. You may not say it out loud, but deep inside of you, you want to get even. You want to get revenge. See, you aren't the first one to feel that way. In the story we look at today, we see David. David was consumed by the thought of revenge. And we pick up the story in 1 Samuel chapter 25, verse 1. It says this, Now Samuel died, and all Israel assembled, and they mourned for him, and they buried him at his home in Ramah. Then David moved down into the desert of Moab. We're going to be in chapter 25 all service long. So if you have your Bibles, you can just hang out right there. See, David, he sought revenge, or he sought refuge in the southern part of the country, in the wilderness. See, David's presence there, it was a blessing for other shepherds and other farmers, because at that point, people were constantly fighting off raids from the Philistines. And so when David, he didn't move just his family, he moved 600 men. That's a lot of men. And so the Philistines, not idiots, right? They stopped raiding their other people's farms. They knew about David, and they didn't want to test him. In verse 2 it says, A certain man in Moab who had property there at Carmel was very wealthy. He had 1,000 goats. That's a lot of goats. He had 3,000 sheep. That's a lot of sheep, which he was shearing in Carmel. His name was Nabal, and his wife's name was Abigail. She was an intelligent and beautiful woman, but her husband, a Calebite, was surly and mean in all his dealings. See, Abigail got a great introduction, right? She's intelligent, she's beautiful, but Nabal is a jerk. In Hebrew, Nabal means intellectually stupid. The equivalent today, we'd call them a moron or a dummy or Captain Ignorant. Odds are his parents probably did not give him that name, but that's the name people called him. Nabal was wealthy and he was arrogant. Nabal was wealthy. He was a wealthy shepherd who benefited from David and his men living in that area. And their presence saved his huge flock from attack and from theft. And so in verse 4 it says, While David was in the desert, he heard that Nabal was shearing sheep. So he sent 10 young men, and he said to them, Go up to Nabal at Carmel and greet him in my name. Say to him, long life to you, good health to you and your household, and good health to all that is yours. Verse 7 says, now I hear that it is sheep shearing time. When your shepherds were with us, we did not mistreat them. And the whole time they were at Carmel, nothing of theirs was missing. Ask your own servants, and they will tell you. Therefore, be favorable toward my young men. Since we came at a festive time, please give your servants and your son David whatever you can find for them. So David sent his men to ask Nabal if he could give them some food as a token of his gratitude for their protection. It wasn't mandatory, but it was generally an acceptable practice that was appreciated. Kind of like going to a restaurant, and at the end, the server doesn't ask you for a tip, but what do? You tip the waiter or waitress for their service. It's the same thing. Saying, hey, we were good neighbors. Wouldn't you be generous and share some of your feast? Verse 9, when David's men arrived, they gave Nabal this message in David's name. Then they waited, and Nabal answered. David's servants, he says, who is this David? Who is this son of Jesse? Many servants are breaking away from their masters these days. Nabal's saying at this point, he's like, David is just another runaway servant who isn't willing to work. He's not the future king. He's just the common, lazy, good-for-nothing taker. And that wasn't all. Surely, me, Nabal, he said this in verse 11, why should I take my bread and water and the meat I have slaughtered for my shearers and give it to men coming from who knows where? He's saying, I don't even know who you people really are. I know that what you say, but guess what? I don't believe you. What a liar. Nabal knew who David was. In fact, everyone knew who David was, and they knew about his victories. But Nabal treated David's men like dogs. He basically said, get out of my house. I'm not going to give you anything. Nabal completely ignored the fact that David's men protected his men and his flock. Instead of blessing David and his men, Nabal responded with anger and insults. Nabal saw no reason to help them. All he could think about was the cost that it could cost him. He was selfish and he was foolish. He earned his name, and they are definitely Nabals in this world. You know them, you work with them, you go to school with them, you might even have one in church with you. Now, don't look around, okay, and figure out who they are. If you're sent by one, don't raise your hand and point it out to everyone. It may be a little awkward service. But in verse 12 it says, David's men turned around and went back. And when they arrived, they reported every word. And I bet they did. And probably with some emotion attached to it. David didn't take it very well, which he kind of understood. And how would you respond if your kindness was repaid with insults? This is how David responded. In verse 13 it says, David said to the men, put on your swords. So they put on their swords, and David put on his. He says about 400 men went up with David, while 200 men stayed with the supplies. See, Nabal messed with the wrong guy. David was so mad that he decided he was going to kill Nabal and his servants. And he was going to destroy everything that they had. David's offended, he's angry, and he's out of control. How do I know that? Well, let's look at verse 22. It says, may God deal with David, be it ever so severely, if by morning I leave alive one male of all who belong to him. So in other words, he's saying, I'm going to spare the women and the children, but everyone else is going to die. I'm going to teach them an important lesson. I'm going to make an example out of them. I am David, and I will not be treated this way. I am David. I deserve better. I'm David. No one should talk to me like that. See, David's mad, and he's angry, and he's going to get even. How many of you can identify with that? Because you would love to handle things that way. See, you have Nabals who insult you, who offend you, and who hurt you. Nabals need to be taught a lesson, right? And I'm going to be the one to teach them that lesson. Because I know the pain, and I know the torture, so I'm going to teach them that. And since you're the one wronged, you decide that you are the one to teach. You like the idea of paying them back and getting revenge. It sounds awesome. And you're like, man, I'm going to feel so good when I do it. But since you didn't get what you deserve, you're going to make sure they get what they deserve. Maybe you've even said, I don't get mad, but I get even. See, there's something intoxicating about revenge. It's seductive and almost irresistible. It's a natural reaction to want to inflict pain on people who have caused pain for you. I don't know if you ever had this, but have you ever got poison ivy before? I don't know about you, but I found out I was highly allergic to poison ivy. And so it starts off like with a small patch, like right here on your arm. And then you don't think about it, and you're like, oh, that's kind of weird. So you scratch it, right? And then there is the poison in the poison ivy that runs down your arm, and the spread of the poison ivy begins. And so it can start off as a small patch, and then maybe a couple of days later, it can go all the way down your arm. It can go down the back of your hands, the front of your hands, when you touch your face and legs, and now you're like sitting in bed like this. Like, what do I do? See, that's what revenge is like. See, thinking about revenge is just like that. Although you know the damage it can do to your heart, you do it anyway. It feels good, and it's fun to think about getting even, but the desire for revenge destroys you spiritually. Jesus taught against revenge. He said things like, do not repay evil for evil. He said, do not take revenge. Do not send angry emails. Don't post a rant on social media. Okay, Jesus didn't say that part, but I'm pretty sure if he was here today, he would tell you, don't send it. In the words of Herm Edwards, think before you hit send. That's what he would always tell the NFL guys. He says, think before you hit send. Once you throw it out there, there's no taking it back. Maybe you're saying, well, come on, Greg, just give me a break. Just bless me. Don't take revenge. That sounds good, but you don't know what they did. You don't know what they said. You don't know how bad they hurt me. But before you tune me out, I want you to listen to the result of this story in verse 14. It says, one of the servants told Nabal's wife, Abigail, David sent messengers from the desert to give our masters his greetings, but he hurled insults at them. Yet these men were very good to us. They did not mistreat us, and the whole time we were out in the fields near them, nothing was missing. Night and day, there were a wall around us all the time. We were herding our sheep near them. Now think it over and see what you can do, because disaster is hanging over our master and his whole household. He is such a wicked man that no one can talk to him. Abigail lost no time. Thank God for good wives right here. It says she took 200 loaves of bread. That's a lot of bread. 2 skins of wine. I have no idea how much 2 skins of wine is, but maybe it's a lot. 5 dressed sheep, 5 seeds of roasted grain, 100 cakes of raisin, and 200 cakes of pressed figs, and loaded them on donkeys. Then she told her servants, go on ahead, I will follow you. But she did not tell her husband, Nabal. As she came riding her donkey into a mountain ravine, there was David and his men descending toward her, and she met them. David had just said, it's been useless, all my watching over this fellow's property in the desert, so that nothing of his was missing. He has paid me back evil for good. Verse 22, may God deal with David, be it ever so severely, if by morning I leave alive one male of all who belong to him. See, last week we talked about David, who was in a position to kill Saul. And he didn't, remember? Saul was chasing David all around the country, going to kill him. Saul went to the bathroom in that same cave that David was hiding in. And so rather than kill him, he just cut off a piece of his robe. And David got so close to Saul, so close to him. But he didn't kill him. But then a short time later, David took 400 men to destroy the entire family of a guy who couldn't give him some food. David's on a rampage. Gone was the heart of mercy. Gone was the heart of compassion. In its place was a heart of vengeance and punishment. And here's what we learn is revenge blinds you to reality. When you're angry, you can't think clearly. And I don't know if there's research about this, but I'm pretty sure that when you're you're filled with anger and revenge, I'm pretty sure half of your brain shuts down. You know, the critical thinking phase of your brain shuts down, and all you can think is revenge and pain and taking back. I'm pretty sure you don't use all the function of your brain. And many of you maybe are the same way. When you feel insulted or wrong, your temper flares, your blood pressure rises, and you become blind to the reality of the situation. You're convinced that your feelings are justified and your words are okay. You say things like, well, they make me look foolish and sinful. Like David, you're consumed with the thought of getting even, often to justify your anger or even your sin. You surround yourselves with people who are just as furious as you. And usually, they all hang out together. And they all keep you riled up together, okay? And then you're like, and have you ever noticed like a group of people that go out to a fight? It's not just like one person fighting. It's like a whole group whipped up into a frenzy like, we're going to do this together. No. Where are the good people that says, I don't think this is a good idea? You kind of push them out of your life. So you create a community of outrage. You fill your house with hate. You place yourself in a setting that hardens your heart and limits your voice, the voices in your life, to the ones that agree and support your anger. See, by surrounding yourself with people that perpetuate your foolishness, you actually become offended when rational people encourage you to change. See, David's immediate reaction was to take matters in his own hands. He didn't consider God's involvement, but instead put together a plan to hurt Nabal and his whole household. Verse 23, when Abigail saw David, she quickly got off her donkey and bowed down before David with her face to the ground. She fell at his feet and said, "My Lord, let the blame be on me alone. Please let your servant speak to you. Hear that your servant has to say. May the Lord pay no attention to the wicked man Nabal." Now, this woman's talking about her husband. "He is just like his name. His name is Fool, and folly goes with him. But as for me, your servant, I did not see the men my master sent. Now, since the Lord has kept you, my master, from bloodshed and from avenging yourself with your own hands, as surely as the Lord lives, and as you live, may your enemies and all who intend to harm my master be like Nabal. And let this gift, which your servant has brought to my master, be given to the men who follow you. Please forgive your servant's offense." Abigail humbly apologized for her husband's foolishness. Then she asked David to forgive her husband. Verse 28 says, "Please forgive your servant's offense, for the Lord will certainly make a lasting dynasty for my master. Because he fights the Lord's battles, let no wrongdoing be found in you as long as you live. When the Lord has done for my master every good thing he promised concerning him, and has appointed him leader over Israel, my master will not have on his conscience the staggering burden of needless bloodshed or of having avenged himself." No doubt that had to make David think a little bit. Abigail said, "If you kill Nabal for the rest of your time as a leader, it's going to be on your conscience. You'll always remember when you killed a fool over some food." See, Abigail reminded David that revenge is a burden. Revenge is a burden. When you make someone else hurt because they hurt you, it doesn't lessen your pain. Instead, it's a burden that you carry for the rest of your life. You always remember how you responded to evil with evil. You'll never forget how you let that person's wrong cause you to do wrong. See, Abigail finished, she said, "And when the Lord has brought my master success, remember your servant." See, Abigail, she was wise. She reminded David that dealing with Nabal wasn't his job. It was God's job. No doubt that she had heard about David's speech to Goliath, Remember that? See, David walked out in this valley in 1 Samuel 17:45. He says, you come against me with the sword and spear and javelin. But I have come against you in the name of the Lord Almighty, the God of the armies of Israel, whom you have defiled. This day the Lord will hand you over to me, and I will strike you down and cut off your head. Today I will give the carcasses of the Philistine army to the birds of the air and the beasts of the earth, and the whole world will know that there is a God in Israel. All those gathered here will know. Listen to what David said, the same David, that this is not by sword or spear that the Lord saves, for the battle is for the Lord's, and he will give all of you into your hands. See, on that day, facing a huge, intimidating enemy, a giant, David said, it's not my battle. The battle belongs to the Lord. It's God's battle who takes care of my enemies. And now facing a fool, David's ready to take care of it of himself. Instead of trusting that God is going to handle it, he's going to handle it himself. But that's what revenge does. Revenge puts you in the place of God. God rights wrongs. God takes care of evil. See, that's God's job. It's not our job. Maybe you're not sure about that. Well, let me show you a couple verses in the Bible. These are all in the Bible. Nahum chapter 1, verse 2, it says, the Lord is a jealous God filled with vengeance and wrath. He takes refuge on all who oppose him and fiercely destroys his enemies. I know what you're thinking. Well, Pastor Greg, that's the Old Testament. Okay, I'll go to the New Testament for you. Romans chapter 12, verse 9, it says, dear friends, never avenge yourselves. Leave that to God, for it is written, I will take vengeance. I will repay those who deserve it, says the Lord. See, when you take matters into your own hands, you seek revenge to the one that has attacked you. You're saying, I don't trust God. I could take care of it myself. I need me to take care of me, and God removes his hand, and he says, okay. If you'd rather handle it, then I'll let you handle it. You choose. Do you want him to suffer your wrath or God's wrath? See, Abigail's apology was also very powerful. And it hit the mark. David listened carefully. When he stopped to consider his actions with consequences, his heart changed. When you are bent on revenge, the last thing you want to do is listen to a voice of reason. Or even to the voice of God. You just want to get revenge. You're just thinking about one thing, getting even. I got to make sure everyone knows. I'm going to hurt them the way they hurt me. Before you go there, before you start yelling, before you send that angry text or the damaging Facebook post, before you start rumors, get into a fist fight, or hire lawyers, just slow down. Check your motives. And remember, your God. See, that's what David did in verse 32. It says, David said to Abigail, he said, praise be to the Lord, the God of Israel, who sent you today to meet me. May you be blessed for your good judgment and for keeping me from bloodshed and from avenging myself with my own hands. Otherwise, as surely as the Lord, the God of Israel, lives, who has kept me from harming you, if you had not come to meet me, not one male belonging to Nabal would have been left alive by daybreak. She came at the right time. He almost made a horrible mistake. And really the question I want to ask you is, how many times have you been up on getting that revenge and someone has come to be that voice of reason? And instead of it being a stop sign, you decided it was a go sign. They didn't know what you were thinking, but they weren't trying to say you're not hurt. They weren't trying to say you shouldn't be hurt. They're just trying to say, hey, let's view this a little differently. Let's view this a little differently. But instead, we get mad at them. We get mad at them because we feel like they don't understand us. See in verse 35, it says, then David accepted from her hand what she had brought to him and said, go home in peace. I've heard your words and granted your request. David and his men, they turned around, they went home. That took some courage just to turn around and go home. David was willing to admit that he was wrong, and he had to stop before acting on his desire for revenge. How many guys, man, you're like, I don't like to admit when I'm wrong. I don't know about you, but I don't like to admit when I'm wrong. But you know what? When I got kids and I messed up, I was the first one to say, I'm so sorry. Because I wanted them to know that they had a father that was okay to ask for their forgiveness when I was wrong. And that's what David did. He turned and he went home. In verse 36, when Abigail went to Nabal, he was in the house holding a banquet like that of a king. He was in high spirits and very drunk. So she told him nothing until daybreak. Then in the morning, when Nabal was sober, his wife told him all of these things, and his heart failed him. And so he became like a stone. About 10 days later, the Lord struck Nabal, and he died. See, Nabal apparently had a heart attack. And when he went into a coma, he never recovered consciousness. 10 days later, he died, and God did handle it. Verse 39, when David heard that Nabal was dead, he said, "Praise be to the Lord who has upheld my cause against Nabal. For treating me with contempt, he has kept his servant from doing wrong and has brought Nabal's wrongdoing down on his own head." See, when David took his hands off Nabal, God took care of it. And David had a clean conscience and a pure heart. And maybe you say, well, Pastor Greg, I love this. So are you saying God's going to kill all my enemies? You're like, yes, I'll put them in the Lord's hands and go get them, Lord. Just take them out. Okay, he may not kill your enemies. And it may not happen on Tuesday. Okay? You say, I'll give God a little time. I'll give him till Tuesday to do that. But here's what I'm saying. That we can trust God to handle it. If we leave it in his hands. And many of you immediately saw the face of the person who hurt you when I mentioned that earlier. Maybe you've spent days, months, or years wasting your energy planning and thinking and wishing you could repay the person for the evil that they have done. See, God is just, and he will bring vengeance in his time. God is in control. And to overcome the desires for revenge, we got to recognize that God is involved. I know what you're thinking. Come on, Greg. You mean that even when someone does me wrong, God is involved? Well, that's exactly what I'm saying. God does not relinquish his authority because of fools. God is in control. To overcome your desire for revenge, you got to give up your right to strike back. You have somehow believed it's your right to strike back. You've been unfairly wounded. If they say something about you, well, guess what? I got a lot that I can give it back to them. If they hurt you, man, don't worry. I can hurt them 10 times worse. After all, they have it coming, right? But what does the Bible say? Romans 12:14, it says, "Bless those who persecute you. Bless and do not curse." Let me give you a secret, though. When you bless people that don't like you, it gets on their nerves, okay? Like it does when they're like, man, I can't believe that person did this. And you're like, man, you know what? As a pastor, there's been a lot of people who've said some crazy things about me. And you know what the crazy thing is? When you go up to them and you shake their hand, you're like, oh, man, how are you doing today? And you're nice to them. They're like this. They're like, man, I can't believe that guy. I'm like, what do you mean? What do you mean? The last church we were at, we had this pastor who first of all, I thought sometimes I'm like, I've never heard someone do this, but there was a guy in the hospital who him and another guy just on the staff didn't get along and so he was in a hospital, needed a pastor on call, and my pastor goes, hey, how about you go? The guy that he always doesn't like him. And he says, it'll be good for you to do that. And I'm like, that's crazy. But you know what? When you smile and you love them, man, it's going to drive them nuts. But guess what? But you let God deal with Leviticus 19:18 says this, "Do not seek revenge, or bear a grudge against one of your people, but love your neighbor as yourself. I am the Lord. See, it's easy to think about love and blessings instead of hate and revenge. Is that automatic just because you're a follower of Jesus? No, it's a challenge, but it's also right. It's time to lay down the burden. It's time to take up the person in your mind right now, whether it was days ago, years ago, and give them to God and to trust God that He's going to take care of it. In your outline today, I have a blank. It says, Lord, I lay down this burden. I trust you to take care of it. I want you to do this. I forgot my pen because I have a name I want to write down. Rachel, you have a pen? I want you to take a moment. Who's that person that holds something against you? Or maybe you're holding something against them. It's time to write their name down and to allow God to deal with them. Let's just take a moment. I'm going to write their name down. Because sometimes it's easy to get wrapped up in hoping something else happens. But sometimes we got to release ourselves from that burden. And just allow God to do what only God can do. See, how will God handle it? I don't know. But guess what? He will handle it. Perhaps it will be the same way as He took care of Nabal. On the other hand, it may be that because of your decision to release it and let it go. The person who hurt you will make things right with God and with you. Whatever God chooses, what we got to do is we got to be willing to accept that. You haven't truly released that person until your prayer is that God doesn't handle them like Nabal. I know it's easy to be like, Lord, you saw Nabal, just take him out. But maybe it's that they surrender their life to you. I know this is tough, but you may say, but I'm going to look like a fool when I try to, we look like a fool when we try to get even. When in your anger you go off. With your anger, your words, your social media, your fist, and your schemes, it discredits the Lord. And it misrepresents His kingdom. You pick up a burden, you carry it the rest of your life, and we got to handle things differently. And that leads to years of anger and bitterness, and it destroys your relationship with others, your relationship with God, which is no way to live. Maybe you're here this morning, maybe you're watching online, and you don't know who Jesus is. Jesus, in this moment, you don't know who Jesus is, and this seems weird to you. But it also maybe seems oddly peaceful to you. Because there's another way to live. This is the kind of deal that you can only do in a relationship with God. Every natural instinct you have to pay them back, you have it, but we are not controlled by our natural instincts when you're a follower of Jesus.